Welcome to Keep the Game Beautiful podcast. Each week, I highlight incredible people who are doing amazing things in soccer, the beautiful game. I'm Anna Turi, your host. Thank you for listening. Today with Missy Price, we talk about mindfulness and mental health. Both are two things that are very, very important. They're important throughout our daily life, and I don't think, at least for myself, I never realized how important mental health truly was until COVID hit, until I was stuck at home with my own thoughts and I wasn't able to keep myself busy. Mental health is also so important in a game as a referee or a coach or a player. Going into a game myself as a player with an attitude that's down already isn't going to be helpful for my team, for my playing ability, or anything else. So it's very important to focus on mental health. And now I'm beginning to learn more and more about mental health and meditation and mindfulness and being aware. With Missy, we also talk about self-journaling, which we didn't talk about DukeTig, but DukeTig brand is a great brand to help with your self-journaling. When I got my first My Trainer, I hadn't really journaled at all before, but then I kind of started and it was fun and I was able to learn about myself and my style. Lately, I haven't been journaling as much, I'll be honest, but as high school season starts, I'm excited to start journaling more and start reviewing my games and learning more about my mindfulness and my mental health throughout a game. Today, the Terry Vaughn Referee Academy started and finished all in one day. I always love the Terry Vaughn Academy in person. I mean, it's so much fun to hear from other referees and learn from other referees. But this year it was over a computer. As we all know, COVID has been rough. We have had online convention, but we're adapting and we're doing the best we can. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Today I'm talking with Missy Price. Missy is the head coach for Wellesley Women's Soccer. She holds her A license and has instructed and spoken on a number of different topics. Dr. Price earned her doctorate in sports psychology. She is the United Soccer Coaches president and is working hard to break down many barriers in the game. So, Missy, I'm wondering if you'd like to add anything else or talk about what got you to where you are today.
I think that was a great summary. That might be one of the best, actually. Short and sweet. I think if I'd add anything, what got me to where I am today is a whole sort of team of mentors and role models and support systems and friends and family and mistakes and successes all along the way. I think I'm where I am today because of like a journey, right? I think you hear that a lot with people, but I feel like even through my coaching journey, I made choices about where I wanted to go coach or jobs that I accepted. And, at the time, you never know what that's going to mean for the future. But in some ways, I sit here now as the head coach at Wellesley, as president of United Soccer Coaches. And I think, all of those steps that had happened along the way and all the people I've met along the way have prepared me or brought me to this place. And I love what I do. So I'm really grateful to all of those people and all of those choices. And even some of them at the time, to be honest, there were definitely moments where I was like, oh man, did I make the right choice about where I am and what I'm doing? And so it wasn't like it was perfect or anything like that. And that it had its challenges and it had its highs and lows and all those things, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I love it. Love my job. Love where I coach now. And I love serving, having the opportunity to serve on the board of directors and currently be the president of United Soccer Coaches. I see that as a very humbling experience. And I'm really grateful to be able to serve our members like that. So that's all I got.
On this podcast, I always start with the same three questions. First, what does the beautiful game mean to you?
Oh, it means everything. Like I think it's a game of life. I think it is about, there's a sort of a science and an art to the game, or a science and the art to coaching. I think that the beauties in the relationships that you develop with colleagues and players, and the relationship you develop even with the game. Like, we all see the game our own way, and we all experience it our own way. We have our ways that we think are, we styles of play or tactics that we enjoy and things that we tend to lean towards. I think it's an expression of who you are. I think players have a lot of freedom of expression in our game, in the way that it's played. And I think too, the beautiful game is really a connector around the world. I mean, it is sort of the game that everyone plays. It isn't necessarily confined to one country or one culture or one lifestyle or one person, or it's played by so many people around the world. And that's been, for me, part of it. I've had the opportunity to travel to different places because of the beautiful game. And then you get there and you see that people love it just as much as you do, or stylistically they play it a little different than you do, but you all love the game. There's something very freeing about it. I think there's something very challenging about it. And I think there's something very, even when you're competing against the other teams, it's like, if you compete to your hardest and they compete to theirs, you're actually making each other better on that day, even if you win or lose. And I think there's something really special about that.
What are actions or things you do to keep the game beautiful?
For me, I think I try to give back to the game, and that looks a lot of different ways. I try to give back through my own service, let's say to the Coaches Association, or learning and mentoring, like either mentoring other coaches or help, like kind of being mentored by them, or kind of these sort of peer relationships or these symbiotic relationships. Like, I don't necessarily think that I'm a better coach than, one of my other colleagues. I think I have a lot to learn. So I think kind of that constant respect for other coaches, and even, like fitness professionals and other things, the technology of the game. So I think that open mind of curiosity is a way that I keep the game beautiful, like respecting that I don't know it all, and respecting that the game's going to continue to evolve, and I can evolve with it. And I think just being honest with my players and being who I am and true to myself in my role as a coach is really important, because it speaks to like my character. And I think who I am and a value of like being authentic and trying to lead with authenticity is really important to me. And so for me, that actually kind of links back to what you're asking, because I think by being true to myself and sort of the things that I value most, and having those values be part of my program and part of the experience that I have at Wellesley as a coach there, and everything, is a way that I can be true to the game, if that makes sense. And that to me helps keep it beautiful. I think advocating for coaches, especially women coaches, that's really near and dear to my heart. I think we need more women coaching in the game. So that's a way that I can keep the game beautiful. And then also advocating to break down any kind of barriers or any kind of social issues that we have. We know that racism is a continual issue, not just in our country, but also within our sport. And I think that if there's anything I can be doing for breaking down barriers associated with that, or enhancing the experience of our coaches, our players, our families that play the game, referees, spectators, whatever that may be, I think that helps keep the game beautiful.
How do you encourage others to keep the game beautiful?
Well, that's a good one. And I've heard you ask other people that too, because I've listened to your podcast. I think we have to think about like character or ethics or sportsmanship. I think we have to think about how the game is part of our communities, part of our world in such a way. And so I encourage others to keep the game beautiful by, sort of putting the bigger picture first. So not putting yourself first or your own rise to fame or success or whatever it may be, but like putting the game first. So putting the experience of your players first, not catering to players, but putting their experiences first. It can't be all about winning. I know we can tie in our sport, which not every sport necessarily has, but we can. But it shouldn't always be about those wins and losses. It should really be about how we are competing against one another, how we're growing the game globally, how we're creating access for the game for everyone to have accessibility to our sport. And so I think for me, it's encouraging people that I interact with to approach their their job or their passion or their life and how it revolves around soccer in some way, shape, or form, to approach that with that concept of gratitude, being part of something bigger than yourself. So you're not just, I'm part of Wellesley College. I'm not just the soccer coach or the athletic department. I see myself as a representative of the college itself, or being part of the bigger world. So I'm, president of our coaches association. So the decisions that I help our board of directors make are to put our members first, right? So the greater good, and trying to put everyone that is part of the game is to kind of just look outside yourself and not always think about what's best for me, but think about what's best for the game, which is a lot to ask. That's a tall order, but that would be my advice, and that would be the way that I would describe it, is to encourage people to do that. I also think I'm really big on coach education. I used to spend a little bit more of my time actually being the coach on the field, helping educate other coaches. I always loved it because every time I feel like I sort of was giving them information on how to be better, they were also teaching me how to be better. I was learning things from them along the way too. So I think educating yourself as a coach on how to teach the game, to how to be a leader, to how to develop team culture and fitness and leadership within your teams and life skills and all sorts of things. How to manage yourself as a coach, if this is your career and your life. How do you take care of yourself from your own mental health and fitness? All the things that we tend to think that we do for our players or to support our players is to also support ourselves, in this coaching journey. So I think being a coach educator is also one of the ways that I keep the game beautiful.
After just those three questions, there's so much more I want to talk about. One thing that really stood out to me was when you mentioned respecting that you don't know everything. Oftentimes, we do come across coaches that think they know everything. How can we interact with them?
I think for me, the strategy that works for me, which may not work for everyone, and I get that, is to express some vulnerability, especially with my players. So that sometimes that sounds or looks like me saying, I think I could have given you better advice there or better feedback as a coach. Let's try it again. Or we get to halftime and the pregame plan we had going into the game didn't really seem to work, and not necessarily being like sort of like a sense of blame to the players on why it didn't work, but even taking some ownership. Like, hey, we gave you a game plan. You guys did your best. I don't think it was the best game plan now that I'm reflecting on it. So let's switch it up now at halftime. Let's make a change. And I think owning that and owning that we're in this together with our players, showing that bit of vulnerability is really important. And I would say that my best advice is also to do that with other coaches. And that's really hard. I think that's really hard for people. And I wouldn't say it's always easy for me, but being able to say, like, to another coach, I don't really know how to do that. Can you help me out? Can really be really valuable. And I would like to think that if enough of us are doing that, that kind of vulnerability or that kind of curiosity, if you want to look at it that way, if that feels like a better word for people, creates the space for others to want to do it too, right? So now if you're in a world where we're all sort of collaborating and asking each other for ideas and asking each other and we don't have to agree, like, I don't necessarily agree that that's the best way to do it, but teach me your way because I need to learn different ways. Or how do you handle this when it happens in a game? Or how do you handle this when it happens on your team? I think we tend to rely on each other when maybe you really are in new territory, but we don't necessarily rely on each other because we don't want to give away like our secrets or we don't want to give away our weaknesses. So I think approaching it from a different standpoint of, I respect you as a coach and I think you respect me. So I've got a couple questions. And I think if enough of us do that, then the other coaches around who maybe are a little bit more difficult to interact with that way might change. I think sometimes even myself, the times when I was defensive, like even with like when I was an assistant coach and maybe was a little defensive with feedback from a head coach, or um, vice versa, as a head coach and my assistant coaches are giving me ideas on how we can do different things with our team, whether that's on or off the field, and maybe it felt like I was defensive. I think those are our own sort of blind spots in our coaching toolkit. And um, it's, do you pay attention when you feel that way? So I think that's the other way that I would say that you, if you don't necessarily want to be more overt about it with people, you could be a little more covert. And it's that self-awareness. Like, what is that in those moments when you get a little defensive or you get a little bit like rigid and you don't want to move to that person's idea and think that their idea is a good one, is to sit with that and ask yourself why. Because a lot of times, like I said, I think it's a blind spot or an insecurity for us as coaches. And we don't want people to know that, right? Because there's a lot, especially at the college level, there's a lot of pressure or perceived pressure to win. And we don't want to make it seem like we don't know how to do something, because that might impact our ability to lead a team or feel like we can win. So I've found that that's been one of the most helpful skills with me, both with my players and for myself at times. But I love the word curious. I love the idea of just like, get curious, be curious about it, because if you approach everything with a mindset of curiosity, then you're going to be more ready to learn in those moments. So I think that's a big factor in it too.
Right at the beginning, you mentioned vulnerability, which can be a big, scary word. How can a coach become more vulnerable even if they're scared, and how can this also help them accept feedback better as well?
Yeah. I think you have to start small. Some people, they keep kind of like a coaching journal or coaching notebook. So obviously coaches write down their training sessions typically and things like that. But it's not often that coaches reflect back on that training session once it's over. Or if they do reflect, it's like, oh, instead of, 2 touches here, or instead of like 7 or 10 passes equals a point, we could have made this modification, or we needed to make the field bigger or smaller, right? The reflection tends to be more about the logistics of the session or the success the team had, and not necessarily self-reflection on your own feedback or the points that you made or your body language or the information that was given. It's kind of like, did I design the session well? But it not necessarily always on how did I do. So I think that could be a great place for people to start. And it doesn't have to be, dear diary, if that feels uncomfortable to people. It literally could just be, here was my sort of my plus thing about the session, something that I thought I did well. Here's something that I thought I didn't do so well. Like, it could be as specific as when I gave Allison feedback, I wish I had said this, or I wish I had done it this way. And then it could be something like, let's think about this for next time. So sort of like plus, minus, and like an arrow, with the idea that like an arrow pointing forward, like, what do I want to do the next time? It could be a great place to start. And then you might look back on that over the course of, even if you just did it for 2 weeks, and see if there's any patterns in your coaching. And that could be a great way to become a bit more vulnerable through self-reflection that feels safer. And then when you get to that point, if you have assistant coaches, is asking them. And I think when we ask, I find this as a head coach, I tell people, head coaches get very little feedback. Or if they do, it's usually the critical kind. So, I think having really good open dialogue with assistant coaches, or if you're an assistant coach with your head coach, is to incorporate that maybe into every session, or let's do kind of like our highs and lows of the week, of our coaching, not of the team's performance, of our performance. So that could be the next step, is by adding someone else in that you feel you trust, that you can be more vulnerable with. And then as you start to be more comfortable with sort of that self-assessment, and the assessment coming from like a colleague or a peer or an assistant coach, is then being able to kind of maybe gather some feedback from one or two players on your team. I'd like to get some feedback on, what you thought, what do you think, I do well when I coach, like the things I'm saying or my body language. Or if you really have a player that you can trust and you're trying to fix something like your body language, let's say, or a word that you usually use that you want to get rid of, have one of them be your kind of your extra eyes, be your sort of your moral compass with that a little bit. And I think by involving them, it really shows that you trust them and want them to be involved in this with you. And then after you've done all that, I would like to think that at that point, you probably feel a little bit comfortable to own up to maybe some coaching decisions or something that you could have done better in front of your whole team. I think it's got to be what works for you, kind of going back to my thing about being authentic. For me, I'm comfortable doing that with my team. I have not always been, but I am now in my career with it. And, I think for some people, there's definitely steps you could take, or you could just jump right in.
I never actually really thought about self-reflection for coaches and coaching staff as a whole, but how important is reflection for players as well?
I think it's the same. I think everybody's different in how, some people are going to process information different, but I think every player can be really good. If you ask any player, you're like, what do you think you did well? They're like, I don't know, maybe this, or I don't know. What do you think? And then if you ask them, what could you have done better? They can't stop talking. There's like this list. I could have done this. I could have done that. There's always room for improvement. And they keep going. And I think that's natural as human beings. Even if you ask us, what are we good at? We tend to shy away from answering that. And we're always able to kind of say, this is what I'm not good at. And that self-talk pattern's not exactly helpful for motivation and confidence. So, I think it's really important for players to reflect honestly. And again, it could be a really simple sort of skill that you can do. If you had just a little notebook, it doesn't have to be something fancy. And any player, a youth player, all the way up to college and professional players can have a notebook in their backpack or their shoe bag or whatever. And, imagine right now, if you had practice later and you were riding in the car with your, a parent and they were taking you to a practice and you pulled out your notebook and you were like, here's one thing I want to try to do well today. Just one thing. What is it? And it could be taking players on 1v1, or communicating more with my, teammates or something. It could be pretty vague or general, or it could be really specific. And then that becomes sort of a focus for practice for you. And then at the end of practice, you kind of give yourself, I used to do this with some players, super simple. Smiley face meant it went well. Sad face meant that it was like, not so good. And kind of like that face with a straight line across for the mouth was like, so, right? Not good, not bad. So that was, they could easily check back kind of and look through, this is what I wanted to do well today. How well do I think I did it accomplishing that goal? Or you can write a statement back to yourself. This was my goal. This is how well I think I did at it. And you can have the same goal for like the whole week at practice, but I would still encourage you to rewrite it each time. Kind of, you sort of ink it to think it. If you've heard that phrase, you sort of write it each time. And then when you're done, you write in a little short reflection and take a look back at it at the end of each week. That could be mental preparation, physical preparation. It could be attitude. It could be, maybe you're wanting to like sort of improve your work ethic, which is really hard to measure to some degree, right? So coming up with a way that you think that you can, do that, but then also now you could, again, involve a teammate. This is one of my goals for the week. Can you help push me through fitness? Let's say I want to run next to you, right? And then eventually maybe you feel like, hey, coach, I've been really working on this. Can I talk to you about it? And you'll have some talking points because you've been kind of journaling or self-assessing it for a couple weeks now. And this is what I think, what do you think? And coaches love those kind of conversations, right? And it shows that you've taken an interest in your own development. And I think that's a really important skill. That's a lifelong skill. It might apply to soccer now for somebody, but it's going to apply to your job later, or parenting, or relationships, or whatever it may be. So might as well start now.
What advice would you give to any athlete in general when setting a goal, not only for practice today, but for long term?
I think the things that there's a lot of research out there on goal setting, and you'll hear the phrase SMART goals. But if I had to summarize it and really kind of put it into three main things, your goal has to be achievable. And your long-term goal could be like big, but it still needs to be somewhat achievable, right? And then those short-term goals, you really have to kind of set them in a way that like what's realistic for me to achieve like this month or this week. And I think the length of time can vary depending on what it is and the type of person that you are. Some people need kind of like that daily motivation, and other people can work across a week towards something or 2 weeks and stay sort of focused on it, right? So I don't think it has to be necessarily like there's one answer to time factor on it, but it's definitely got to be realistic. Realistic means like you can actually do this. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it's you can actually do this, and how long do you think it's going to take you? And then break that down into some smaller chunks. And then I think you got to write it down, and you got to tell a friend or a parent or a sibling. You got to get a support system on board. I think where a lot of us go wrong is we think we can do it always by ourselves, or we think that maybe we're a little embarrassed by our goal. Like someone might laugh at us or be like, seriously, that's what you want to do? So you're a little, unsure or insecure about your goal. But the minute you tell someone, I want to do this, and this is important to me, you don't even have to say, help keep me on track. You can just say, this is really important to me, and you talk about it. That person is going to know. And if they're on your team, now you got two people helping you achieve that goal. And I think that's where goal setting can really come in. So my three big things, if I had to kind of summarize it, is you got to be able to do it. You got to be able to break it down into chunks that you can do a little bit at a time. And you need a support team. You got to tell someone. I think the writing it down is just as important, obviously, but that's kind of implied. It's really like put it out there and tell someone, because that accountability really goes a long way.
A lot of what we have talked about already has been mental health and mindfulness. What do you think one thing a coach should know about mindfulness is?
I think in its simplest form, I think mindfulness for a lot of people feels very untouchable. Like, I don't know what that means. I can't touch it. It's not tangible. But if you look at it from this perspective, it's about being present in the present moment. That seems something more realistic that I can do, right? And so I think coaches learning about mindfulness in that way, and being mindful about where are you in the present moment as a coach. And as a coach, you have to shift a lot to, like future decisions or future planning of your team, let's say, and what you're doing right now. So it doesn't mean that you never think about the future. It's just that when you're in that moment, whatever it is you're doing right now, you're at practice, you're in that moment at practice, and that you're in that activity. So if we're working on an activity and it's, some kind of possession activity, but we're going to take that to something bigger later, I already know that in the back of my mind. I already have it on my practice plan. So stay here now and work on that. Or don't think about the way the player played in the last game and have that be a distraction. And now you're evaluating her, let's say, on sort of this preconceived notion of how she did last game, whether that was good or bad. And now you're in practice. Like, try to evaluate the players in the situation as what's happening right now. And mindfulness has there's a huge translation between staying present in the present moment and things like focus or concentration, managing emotions, those kinds of things. Because if I'm present in the present moment, then I'm focused on the task at hand. It's kind of the simplest way to put it. And I'm not labeling what's happening as good or bad. So that takes away some of those sort of emotional management, because a lot of times we're like, oh, that was a mistake. And then I feel bad that I made that mistake. Now I'm distracted. I'm thinking about the past, which is the mistake. I'm not thinking about the future. And the energy I'm putting into that and the emotional response and probably the self-talk is, not going to help me with the next pass I have to make, or the next recovery run, or the tackle, or the shot, or whatever it may be. So for coaches, I think mindfulness is both in how you can handle yourself as a coach, but it's also a skill that you can teach your players so that they can be more present in the present moment in its simplest terms. There's more to it than that. And mindfulness has a lot of other factors associated with it, like gratitude and resilience. And you can even do some sort of what they call body scans as part of mindfulness. And that can be a great tool for stress reduction. And even kind of if you think about recovery for athletes. So there's a lot of stuff out there and ways that you can use it. And I think it's a great skill. Like a lot of times, like I said in the beginning, we do all these things for our athletes to support them, but we don't always support ourselves as coaches. And mindfulness is, you don't need anything else but yourself. And in a lot of ways, your breath, and there's other activities you can do. It can take 5 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be this like 45-minute to an hour meditation session either. And I think that's somewhat of a myth at times about what it is. And so for me, it's about really trying to stay present. An example I often use is, let's say that one of my athletes texts me something and it's really close to practice time, and it becomes like a distraction. Like, they text me that they're going to be late to practice or something like that. And it's something they knew about ahead of time, or I don't know, just something that can kind of, or you just had a meeting with a administrator, let's say, or you just had a call with someone, and it wasn't the best call for whatever reason, your personal life, work life, doesn't matter. And now you've got to go out to the field and coach your team. Being able to just take that and put it on a shelf for later, not forget about it, not leave it, not, like try to push it out of your mind. You actually, sort of say, all right, the most important thing right now is that I'm ready to train my team. And how do I do that? And with the world of coaching today, there's a lot of other things we all have to do besides just coach our team. And so I think that's where it's become a really important skill for me. And managing my emotions. I'm actually not a very, I don't get too upset at games and things like that. I'm not going to fly off the handle. But I care deeply about my team, and I care deeply about how we do. And like when we're, losing, like I always feel it with them. Like it's just one of those things. And sometimes that can not be a good thing for my coaching. And so helping me stay present so that I can be the best coach for them.
For a coach that can get overly emotional or really gets wrapped up in the heat of the game, how can they remind themselves to calm down?
Yeah, there's a lot of great techniques out there. I mean, you'll hear people say, take a deep breath. And like some people want to like smack you when you say that. You're like, no kidding, right? Like, okay, thanks, Captain Obvious. So, I think there's a lot of really good strategies that you can do to manage that. But one simply is like controlling our breath. Others are strategies that are a little bit more related to like thought stoppage or replacing thoughts, which is a little bit of a different technique than mindfulness. You can also, a lot of people have used sort of their assistant coach as a support system for that. So they have some kind of little thing that they do, like the assistant coach walks over and they kind of say like a trigger word to that head coach. And that's when the head coach knows, all right, I'm getting a little bit overly emotional here, or I'm kind of losing controls. But that goes back to everything we've said. You've got to be a bit vulnerable to recognize that, or self-aware, or you've got to include people if that's a goal that you're trying to do, right? So I think it goes back to like a lot of these things you can't do on your own. I've had coaches also share with me that they set up like a bench camera, and this is both for them and for their athletes. And so you have a camera that's just set up, pointed at your bench, and, yeah, sure, it's kind of weird at the first, but then everybody forgets it's there. And if you go back through it, you can watch yourself as a coach. You can hear yourself. Same thing for players. They can see their body language. They can hear how they're providing feedback or encouragement or whatever to their teammates. Same for you as a coach. And that can be a really great place to start. because sometimes when you get emotional as a coach, sometimes coaches actually get quieter, right? Or their body language changes. So I think that can be a great way to maybe even become more self-aware at first, both you and your team, and then figure out strategies on how to best deal with it. One of the things that I do actually is I sort of tell my players what they can expect from me. So, you can expect me to sit on the bench most of the time. Don't take that as that I'm disinterested, because they might have been used to a coach who's up a lot and walking up and down the sidelines. I tell them that. So I know we're on a podcast, so it's kind of hard to, people won't see me, but it's like I put my hand on my chin a lot and look like I'm thinking, and I have one arm crossed across my body, right? So one arm's on my chin, one hand's on my chin, my other hand is kind of crossed to my elbow. So it looks like my arms are crossed and maybe I'm closed off. And I'm like, that's me thinking, that's me into it. So when you see that, I'm like, I'm in it. Like I'm in the flow. Now, if I'm not doing that, it doesn't mean I'm not, but don't interpret that as like I'm angry or I'm thinking that you just did something wrong, or, that kind of thing. I've also shared with my players that when I do get up and do walk up and down the sidelines a little bit, that's often also a way for me to think and process. So it isn't, don't interpret then now, oh, she was sitting, now she's standing. Does that mean something? So I think it's really important sometimes too, like, this is what you can expect from me as a coach. A lot of coaches have bench expectations for their players, right? Like, this is how things we can do and say, and things we don't want to do and say from the bench. So I think it's fair game to be able to kind of communicate that to your players as well. I think the idea of transparency and just being as open as possible has helped me a lot as a coach, because then my players aren't wondering, they aren't wondering things, that kind of thing. Like, I think it's all about, hey, we're on the same page if we know this stuff about each other.
Everything that you have said about mindfulness, it is very obvious how important it is on the field for players. How can we teach mindfulness in the best way?
So the way that I've started to do it with my team is like, I just try to start as sort of like simply and easily as possible. So one example is, before we play our games, we take 3 deep breaths together. So if you think about the team being in a circle and our arms kind of locked around each other's shoulders. So as you take a deep breath in, you're going to feel everybody's shoulders rise and everybody's like upper body move up. And then as we take a deep breath out, everybody's breath goes out. So that you kind of that in and out, or that like contracting and expanding of a circle. And we do 3 deep breaths before every game. And that isn't meant to be like, so for some, that breath is calming. For some, it's centering. For some, it's energizing. So it isn't, we don't tell them what it has to be, but we also label it as like, one breath, one heartbeat, one team, right? So that's a way for us to all, it's a trigger that if you haven't gotten here yet, like the game's about to start. So if your mind isn't here yet, because our players come with all sorts of distractions from their personal life to academics to whatever. So do I as a coach, we're human. So if you haven't quite gotten it together yet, this is it. This is your last trigger because the game's about to start. We incorporate mindfulness into our recovery day. So we'll do some mindful breathing, or we'll listen to a mindful meditation we usually start at a 5-minute length, sometimes even shorter. And then we build it up through the season. I send my players a quick mindfulness like script that they can listen to at any point in time during the day. Or like if they're having trouble falling asleep at night, we've given them that resource too. So I think it just becomes a pattern that a habit that you make as part of your day. We talk about how, like, if you have a big project or a big presentation in class and you feel yourself get nervous, like, do the mindful breathing that we've done, because that can calm down your heart rate a little bit and help you get more centered and focused on what you have to do. So it's like, this isn't just something that's going to help you play better or help you at practice or games. It's something you can use in life. For me, when I have to have like a difficult conversation, or when maybe have to like present something and maybe I'm feeling a little nervous. Those nerves tell me I'm ready. I've learned that about myself, but I also will, just close my eyes and I do what I call counting breaths, or what you might hear in mindfulness world is counting breaths. So that's simply like when I breathe in my head, I say 1. And when I breathe out in my head, I say 2. And then in 3, out 4, in 5, out 6, at a slower rhythm than that. But that helps me just kind of feel a sense of calm, and I can just do it till I count to 10. And that's kind of enough for me because I've done it pretty often. I also do it at silly, like, so this is the world's going to learn something about me now. I also do it when I'm like in any kind of situation that sort of makes me nervous. Like if I was like going to the dentist, like I had to get something done on my tooth and I was like, I had to get Novocaine, and I'm like, nobody really likes this, but okay, and as that's happening, I'm doing counting breaths in my head. Like my eyes are closed, I'm breathing my way through it, but I'm not just breathing as like the doctor's telling you, big deep breath, like, or the dentist. I'm actually doing those counting breaths in my head, because if I pay attention to the breath and I pay attention to the count, I'm not hearing, or I'm not thinking about the actual like Novocaine, right, that's happening at the dentist that might make me nervous. So it really is like a skill that you can use kind of anywhere, anytime. Another one that I've used this with my players when they might be kind of super stressed out in a moment, or frustrated. You might hear it called like box breathing. I think people also call it tactical breathing or 4-count breathing. And it's very similar, but you inhale for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 4. There's 2 different styles to it. You inhale for a count of 4, you kind of sort of like pause or hold your breath, but you don't want to tense up, but pause for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, pause for a count of 4, and keep going. And that can really, like if your heart's racing or you're super irritated or frustrated, that can really help calm your system. I think the thing to remember is these are like sort of, you can look at it as like a sort of mind to body technique in a way. Like I'm breathing and counting and doing certain things, and that breath is impacting the physiological reaction in my body, right? So, and there's plenty of science behind us to tell us that it helps with stress and anxiety, both acute and sort of more daily as well.
Moving forward a little bit, can you talk about what you're doing now as president of United Soccer Coaches?
Sure. So, I think the things that we're doing, we just came off of a digital convention, the first time we've ever done that in the history of the association. And of course, we had to do that given everything with COVID-19 pandemic. And, that was sort of wildly like trudging off into the unknown. Like you just didn't know what was going to happen with it. I mean, obviously, our staff in the national office and our CEO and all the people that do all the work, the board of directors is more responsible for strategic planning and fiscal responsibility of the association and other things. But all the people that do all the work, they were fantastic and put together this amazing convention with the help of a couple of different supporters as far as the digital technology. And I think it was a really great experience for our members. And I heard a lot of great feedback from it. And as a member and as the incoming president, I was really proud of what we were able to do, given the circumstances. And I think it taught us a lot about even resources that we might be able to provide to members. So I think that's our jumping off point. COVID has challenged all of us in so many different ways. And when we look at the association, in my time, kind of, I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic when I was on the board of directors, and now that I'm the president, so for me, it's really been about focusing on our membership. What are coaches still experiencing? What have they experienced in this last year? We've had to pivot and offer different educational opportunities than we typically have in the past. And so, how are we able to support coaches in the same way if our educational experiences have to change? Maybe coaches need new support. Maybe there's things that are out there that are this just sort of constant changing world, or some people are playing soccer more regularly. Other people still really aren't playing. And that means they need different things to support themselves and their players. And so, I think the biggest thing for me has been about building our community, relying on the strength of our members. We have fantastic coaches that are members of our association, being able to lift each other up and support each other through it, listening to what our members need, and taking kind of some of the stuff we have learned in the last year about how we can continue to modernize, would be a great word, but modernize the association's support of coaches, the benefits for coaches, and continue to be relevant as these times constantly evolve and change for us. So that's my biggest thing right now, is the president, is to help guide the association through the end of the pandemic. And hopefully we're going to see that in this year. Hopefully we're going to see us come together and be able to take care of this thing and provide coaches with the support that they're going to need to get through the rest of this and to come out of it, and be adaptable and flexible and modern and relevant in all of that. And so I think you are going to see things like mental health. I think you are going to see things like innovative techniques or technologies that coaches can be using. We've seen a lot of that really pop up in the marketplace. Companies that maybe had planned to launch some kind of technology online or a wearable or something like that, and they sped up their timeline because coaches needed it now. So I'm really curious to see where all of that goes, and how we can be basically the place for all things soccer coaching. Like if you need something and you're a soccer coach, you just go to unitedsoccercoaches.org and we're right there. I think and you're like, there it is. I think that's who we need to be.
This year's convention was definitely different, but it just, for me at least, made me realize how much I was excited for next year to meet all together.
Yeah, I think that I kept saying it's going to feel like a family reunion in Kansas City, especially because that's where the national office is. That's our home base. The convention hasn't been there in many years, so it's kind of a coming home party. And then with this whole couldn't do it in person type thing. So yeah, I see it as a big party. So everybody needs to get their tickets now.
Now I'm going to take us back to the beginning. I remember you talking just a little bit about winning and losing. And I know sometimes for coaches, this record is very big, but what else is it important that we focus on after maybe a rough game or a rough season?
I think here's the thing. If you didn't care about winning or losing, you probably wouldn't be a coach. I think it's ingrained. I think athletes who participate in sports, especially when you get to these levels, at some point you choose to continue playing the sport. And I think when you make that choice, competition may not be your first reason why for everyone. And I think that's okay, but it's probably in there, because if you didn't like competition, I don't think that you would necessarily continue in sport. I could be wrong on that. But I think for me, whether we win or lose on our team, we approach every game as a learning opportunity. We approach every game as this just made us better, whether we won or we lost it or we tied. We pull out a lesson from every game. Games that we've lost and it hasn't been pretty, like we didn't show up to play, or that team was just really better than us, is attributing our success and failures to things that are in our control and being critical of ourselves, but in a way that helps us move forward, right? I don't think we can just be critical without a solution. So sometimes I think where, me as a coach even has fallen short at times is, all right, we lost that game. What went wrong? Okay, don't let that happen again. We don't really have a solution or a plan or a way to problem solve it. So really kind of trying to learn from those losses, and you'll hear that a lot. But I think when I think of learning from losses, it's attributing success and failure, not just success. Like sometimes we attribute to success to things that are in our control, but we attribute failure to bad luck or something out of our control, so that we attribute both our successes and our failures to things that are in our control. That when whether we win or lose, we treat it the same. What lessons did we learn? And how do we like propose plans to either make sure that we can continue doing those things to the best of our ability, or do we have a plan for how we can make ourselves better or not do those things moving forward, or tweak how we're doing something so that doesn't happen again, because it's in our control. And then I think the third part of it is that you have to keep things in perspective. Like on any given day, there's, at least at the Division III level where I coach at, there's like 400 and plus teams playing a game. Let's say it's a Saturday, almost everybody's probably playing. And sure, we can have some ties, but for the most part, you could probably say that almost 50% of those teams are going to win and 50% are going to lose. Let's say there were no ties on that day. There's always going to be a winner and a loser, and that can't be the only thing that you define yourself as a coach or as a team. And so I think it's really important that coaches and teams have values and cultures and structures in place that they assess themselves on. So for us, that has a lot to do with things like gratitude and curiosity, a willingness to learn and improve, and a desire to compete. But when it comes to certain games and when it comes to certain times in the season, we might have, so you go back to that goal setting, we tend to chunk our season into phases, like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and then games within those phases. So like game 1, game 2, game 3 in phase 1. And then when it goes to phase 2, it's game like 4, 5, and 6. So the games keep counting, but in each phase, there's chunkable like things that we can manage in there. So maybe in phase 2, we learned some things about our team in phase 1, and we really want to implement those in phase 2. It has nothing to do with our opponents. It has everything to do with ourselves and how we can continue to improve. And then each game might have its own goal. That might be more tailored toward that game or that opponent, or something we're really trying to implement. So I think that's the way that you kind of put it all together, right? You've got to attribute your success and failure to things that are in your control. You have to have a culture or a sort of a system or a value structure in place that guides everything that you do, regardless of winning and losing. And then I think for me, it's that we have our season in particular chunked in ways that we can set some goals for different phases or games or even practices. Like, what do we want to accomplish today at practice? Like, we tell the team that. And how do we know we are accomplishing it? And we get them to give us some ideas about how do we measure that. So that way we're all on the same page, and it makes the focus more on us than on everyone else. And I think that helps us manage that there is more to this than winning and losing. And at the end of the day, for me, I think it's really simple. I want players who play for me to develop into the best version of themselves in the time that they are with me. And that's going to be on the field and off the field. So there's all these other things that we haven't even talked about them as people, right? Most of my conversation's been focused really on them as athletes, but for me, they're people first. And they're going to have goals and aspirations and things outside of my team. They're going to compete with themselves in the classroom, or for like an internship, or for a career they think they want to have. They're going to have the drive for that, right? And so for me, it's about translating the skills that they're learning, being part of our team, to everything that they do in their lives to help them become the best version of themselves they can be in the time that they're at Wellesley, or the time that I had the opportunity to coach them. And so that's my other measure of success. Was I able to do that, not for the team as a whole even, but for each individual? And that's going to look really different for every player. It's not the same. The trajectory isn't the same. The goals aren't the same, but I hope that I can be that for every player that I have the ability to coach, because that's my most favorite thing about the job.
We've come up to our final question, which I ask every guest. What do you hope people remember about your impact to soccer and the world?
I hope that it's such a, that's a big one. I think I kind of said it there, but I hope that the players and the coaches and administrators and referees and sort of all the people that I've been able to interact with through my career, through my life in soccer. I mean, I've been doing this since I was like, what, 5, like most of us, you know. I didn't know it was going to be my career when I started playing it. I had no idea. But where I am today, I hope that people would look back and say that, you know, Missy cared a lot about the players that she worked with, kind to all the people and colleagues and mentors that she had a chance to interact with, and made a difference in the sport, made it better, left it better than she found it. And for some people, that might be very personal to them. And for others, it might be maybe some project or initiative I accomplished as president this year, let's say with the United Soccer Coaches, that left the game better than I found it. But, you know, for me, I hope that people realize that I care and that I want to treat others with kindness, and I'll fight for our sport and advocate for people who need a voice in our sport, and that I left it better than I found it.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I was like totally psyched when you reached out and wanted to do this. I was like, I know her. And I've definitely listened to your podcast. So this was a treat. Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening too.
You're welcome.
As we all know, COVID has been hard for everyone and for all coaches. I'm excited to see what United Soccer Coaches does when we are no longer struggling with COVID, and to see what the future looks like. It's definitely an exciting future in the next few years coming off of this kind of crappy year. In my opinion, this was actually one of my best podcasts I have recorded in a while, so I'm very excited to get this out to everyone to hear. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and until next time, remember to keep the game beautiful.